lesson today is God's hedge. We hear of God's providential care and we understand that, but the best place that we can learn of God's hedge about us is in the book of Job. And I love the book of Job. But in that, there's two opinions of God's hedge. There's Job's opinion and God's opinion of that hedge. And we'll get into that, but before we do, we're going to do a little bit of an overview. First thing first, Job was not a Jew. This is the only book in the entire Bible that has nothing to do with Judaism and with any of that. This was in the patriarchal age before the law of Moses, when God spoke to the heads of households. And God had many believers, and we would call them priests because they did do sacrifices throughout the world. So when you find traces of Judaism and Christianity in other religions in the world, there's a reason. God had his priests throughout the world. Job was one. Balaam was one. There were many. So don't be surprised that God had his teaching everywhere. But when you have him preaching to people, as in the patriarchal age, it can be a little bit hard to tell who's preaching the truth. So, in those other countries and those other religions, it got twisted. Just as Job's religion got twisted. But we want to see who Job was. And a lot of times people say the book of Job is about the problem of pain. It's not. Yes, it does cover that, but it's about the struggle of faith with problems. That's what it's about. How does a person of faith handle trials and temptations? First thing we know about Job from Job, the first chapter, verse 1, is he was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. That's the first thing about it. Not that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters and so many sheep, camels, yoke of oxen, and donkeys, and servants, and that he was the greatest of all people in the East. That's not what is mentioned first. You know, when we deal with people, we generally go the other way. Oh, this guy's a famous actor, and he's got a lot of money, and oh, by the way, he does some nice things. Everybody knows that Gary Sinise is a great actor. And you know, when somebody mentions Gary Sinise, the first thing they're going to say is, he's a great actor. He was in Forrest Gump. He did all these things. Instead of saying, that man gives his time and his money to U.S. veterans all the time. But God has his priorities straight. So when he wrote the book of Job, he put the most important thing about Job first. Now we know that he was what we would call a priest, because he would offer burnt offerings for his children. This is all in that first chapter. So this is the kind of man he was. He was always worried about his kids. Always trying to do what was right. But if you read the entire book, you'll find that because God spoke to the fathers, and not all of them would tell the truth, and many of them were just plain weird. We know from his 3 friends that we'll find later, but he had a warped view of the world. His view of the world was God. God, 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 God. There was no Satan. You'll see Satan in the book, but you won't hear him or his friends or his wife or anyone else mention Satan. They mention God. That's it. Good comes from God. Bad comes from God. They don't even mention the idea of natural. There are going to be some people today that are going to go sliding off the road. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some people who are going to end up in a ditch today. It is not because they did something wrong. It's because it's snowing. And they can't drive very well. I'm one of those. But you never see those things. Everything is, if good happens to you, it's because God gives it to you. And if bad happens, it's because you did wrong and God is punishing you. There is nothing else. There's this very black and white thing. And when you look at the world that way, and so many people do, even today, you have trouble being a person of faith. You are going to lose people before they really should. And that destroys some people's faith. You may lose your job for no fault of your own. But Job gives us an understanding of these things. Now, besides all those, we're not going to look there, but in Job 29:7, we found out that he had his seat at the city gates. That meant he was one of the ruling council of the city. He was a big man. Wonderful. Now, we need to understand that Job is different than us. For one, even God called him blameless and upright. I think when God looks at me, he goes, Les tries to be. I think he goes, Les really tries. But Job was so good that Satan, the adversary, took notice of him. And there was a time, now this is in verse 6, when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. All the angels were there. Now this is a heavenly gathering, but I personally like the way that Brother E.W. McMillan said. That's church. There comes a time when the sons of God get together and Satan's going to be right there. So, that's not really what it's talking about, but I think it's apropos that does happen. And God brags on Job. He brags on him. And he says in verse 8, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? Then Satan answered God and said, does Job fear God? I will curse you to his face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. He went out to do what he was always doing, causing trouble. Satan knew that there was a hedge. That God had blessed him. He had made sure that none of these bad things happened. I'm pretty sure if you've got that many sheep and cows and goats and camels and all those animals, they had a bad year sometime. Job never did. He did all right. God was taking care of him. He had blessed him. He had put up a hedge. And the thing to remember is he never cut the hedge down. Even though he said, Satan, it's okay. I'm going to lower the hedge ahead. I'm going to lower the hedge a bit. But you can go this far and no further. That is a hedge. When we face trials and temptations, we need to remember that we too are hedged about. And those trials and temptations that come through are only those that get through the hedge. The hedge is still there. It is still protecting us from most and the most dangerous. But as we talked about last Sunday, when James says, count it all joy, trials and temptations, we don't learn. God knew that human beings, unfortunately, only learn things the hard way. When it comes to patience and perseverance, the only way you learn it is by having trials and temptations come your way. That's the only way it can be learned. So what does Satan do? He takes away all of Job's property and his children. If one of my children dies, I will be totally devastated. If all of my children die, I don't know how I could take it. That would be hard. And I'm not a very... I don't have as much as Job. I'm not the greatest man, even in Iona. There's people there with a lot more money than me. But if I lost it all, that would be hard. But Job stayed faithful. Even though the hedge let some bad through, some real bad. Now, one thing I want to bring out about this is, he lost his children. They're dead. Even though in the end he gets more children and everything. And that's kind of hard. The only thing that I want us to understand, and I think that those of us here in the audience understand it really well, because we're all over 25. We're going to die. When and how is the only question. There's no question about we won't die. Unless we're here when the Lord comes back, we are going to die. Did it matter that Job's children died then or 20 years later? Still going to die. And that's one of the things that I think is important for us to get out of the message is when those things happen to us, we have to realize that we don't like the time, we don't like the place, but it's going to happen. And we are the first generation that can say with a straight face, it's not right for a parent to outlive his child. Our grandparents could not say that. Their grandparents could not say that. At no time in history did not most of your children die before you. That's why they had 12 and 13 and 16 kids. Because if half of them died, you still had the rest work the farm. That's a fact. When loved ones die, it is so terribly, it hurts our heart. It really does. But the fact is, that's what's going to happen. Put yourself back in your grandparents' and great-grandparents' days when they would lose 3 children. So here's Job. He's having this tremendous problem. But there's still a hedge. So Satan goes back. Next time the Son of God came to before the Lord. And he comes again and goes, you seen Job? Well, Satan says, well, he basically says, God, your hedge is too high. He goes, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to his face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life. So Job had loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. And then he gets, to me, the worst of all. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. That's the bolt that got through the hedge that to me is the worst. That one person that you depend on, that you trust, that means so much to you, turns their back on you. Job had, I believe, more trials, temptations, pain, and suffering than any human being before or since. And yet he still stayed faithful to God. Now he started to question. Because you remember, something bad happens, it's God didn't do it to you because you did something wrong. Did you notice the phraseology there? Satan goes, you touch him, you do this, and God says, you do it. I don't do that. That's you. That's not my job. But Job thought that all bad things were punishments from God. That's why God bragged on Job, because I believe that he was better than we are. That even without the Holy Spirit, without all of those things, he trusted God so much. I'm going to come to the 3rd chapter of Job, verse 23. This is Job's view of the hedge. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? He saw God's hedge as something that imprisoned him. And I get the picture of this hedge not being like my hedge around my house. It's prickly, but it's not bad. But I get the picture of a hedge of thorns. That he's hedged in, he's hemmed in, he can't move. Every time he moves, it hurts. That's what Job saw because of the way he believed the world worked. And yet he still trusted God. He didn't know why God was doing this. And he was kind of upset at God. We know better. We know that God takes care of his children. But that is not going to stop us from having people who die, from losing jobs, having house fires, having car wrecks, losing money in the stock market. Those things are going to happen. But God is going to take care of his people. And I think because we're, as Christians, we don't always pay as much attention to the Old Testament that maybe we should. That we needed to have it again. I think if you really look at Job, you should go, we got it. Doesn't matter what happens to me. God has his hand in there, and he knows just exactly how much I can stand. And he knows what's good for me. That God is working with every person in this universe and everything, and he's working it where it'll all come out okay in the end. It looks like a mess now, but in the end it'll be okay. But he knows that we need more than that. Romans, the 8th chapter. Tells verse 28, he says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Well, so you saying that a car wreck can work to my good? Losing a job can work to my good? Having a divorce can work to my good? No, I'm not telling you that. God is. Because I've been wrong. He's never wrong. God can work all things together for our good. Are all things good? No. But God can use that good, use that bad for good. You don't believe that? I want you to look at Doug down there. Doug had his senior trip in Vietnam. He got to go to Vietnam. That's a wonderful thing. Being shot at, having people pass away under his command. What a terrible thing. And what makes it even worse, and I'll tell you this. I was in junior college during the Vietnam War. I could have gone in and been a second lieutenant. They were taking us like crazy. I said, I'll wait till I get drafted, and they never drafted me because Doug's a better man than I am. I was not about to have all those other people depending upon me. I'm not that big of a man. I couldn't do it. Doug was. Now the thing is, that war was horrible. A lot of Vietnamese and a lot of Americans died. And even though we left Vietnam, there are still people in Vietnam who are Christians today because the soldiers that we sent over there left Jesus behind in the hearts of those people. I can't think of anything much worse in my generation than the Vietnam War. But good came from that war. There are people who we will meet in heaven that would never have heard the gospel. Because as Christians, we're not spreading it everywhere. There are Christians in all of those countries because our soldiers took their faith, lived their faith in the midst of hell on earth. God works all things for good. God has a hedge on his people. Don't let Satan drive you away from your God by the things that happen. Because they're going to happen. But have faith that not only did Job get through it, but that he has promised us that if we love him, everything will work toward our good. CDs when I got divorced. Called Hurt, Destroyed. I now have a helpmate that I never had before. I have love. I have things that I would not have had. I'm going to give my quote from music. Now those that are maybe listening to it on YouTube or on our on Facebook may never have heard me do it. Everybody sitting here has heard it many times. There's a song called The Gambler. And the line is, never count your money while you're sitting at the table. There's time enough for counting when the dealing's done. You don't know whether you're winning or losing till the game's over. And trying to figure out whether you're winning or losing is a good way to lose. Life is like that. You won't see all of the glory, all of the goodness that God has done for you until you meet Him face to face. And then you'll understand why some of these things happen. And you'll see the good that happened, even from the bad, that you can't see in this life. Don't let Satan steal your joy by temporary pain and suffering. Anybody needs to answer the invitation in a public way, we'd ask them to come now.